Hello guys, I've been asked to share my thoughts about CBTi, about sleep restriction, stimulus control and all that because probably those of you who follow my channel for some time know that I'm not really talking about CBTi, and in fact I find a lot of things from CBTi quite unhelpful. At least they were unhelpful for my personal recovery journey. So I just realized that I would make a video where I just share my honest opinion about this particular approach, but I also want to be kind of fair to this approach because I was playing around with CBTi on my recovery journey, and I came to different conclusions. There were some things that were helpful, some things that were not helpful, so I just want to kind of present my overall picture, how I see it. And I don't want to make it sound like, oh, okay, CBTi is something that you shouldn't try, or CBTi is something that you definitely need to try. So I want to really just present kind of like dispassionately this particular direction, and then you can basically choose on your own preference whether you want to try it or not. And also keep in mind that this video is not a guidance, any sort of like advice on how to implement CBTi. It's more about me sharing stuff that I know about it. And if anyone wants to try it, I would suggest reaching out to specialists who work with a CBTi. Also maybe read some books, or go to the sources that specialize in this particular topic, because I'm not trained CBTi specialist or not a CBTi expert in this. So just for you to understand that. I also want to say that I haven't really done any sort of formal program in CBTi in a way that I was not going somewhere and implementing this 8 weeks thing where I was, restrict my sleep and so on. I was more like independent learner. I just was reading about it a lot, and I was playing around with that stuff, trying different things, combining, mixing, matching, and I drew my conclusions from that, but I was not really fully committed to that kind of practice for a long period of time. So just also keep that in mind. I don't want this to sound like, okay, this is like the ultimate truth about CBTi, because I know that there are people who share different opinions about that, and my opinion is just a opinion. It is not something that everyone has to, subscribe to. And so if anyone interested what I think about CBTi, this video is going to be about that. And the way I want to structure it is that first I want to generally present what CBTi is, what kind of concepts it uses. Then I want to talk about the pros, like the benefits or advantages of CBTi, and yes, I see some advantages of CBTi. Then I want to talk about the disadvantages of CBTi, because there are also a lot of points which I don't fully agree with. And then in the end I thought about like trying to maybe rethink CBTi in a way that how to make it more helpful for people who kind of like want maybe to try it, but they were kind of like not sure about that. So I was just thinking about like the reason why it works for some people and doesn't work for others maybe is in the fact that not everyone are having the same kind of personalities for whom CBTi fits. So maybe certain like rethinking this concept could be actually helpful, but again, this is just an opinion. So let's go with that. Okay, so CBTi basically stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia, and it is not to be confused with CBT, which is basic, general direction in psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. I find them very, very different, because usually whenever anyone talks about CBTi, it always includes things like sleep restriction, stimulus control, sleep efficiency score, sleep diary, sleep hygiene, and so on and so forth. So it seems like there is a very specific kind of regimen, the behavioral interventions that people stick to, and then it kind of based on that. So in the classic CBTi, CBT is it's basically about like working with our thoughts, beliefs, trying to kind of challenge them, and really the focus goes more to the cognitive part, and then of course there is also behavioral part. But I feel like with CBTi, it is mostly about the behavioral changes, and this is where a lot of people might, find struggle with that. But basically, like shortly to introduce what it includes. First of all, the progress in CBTi is based on the measurement called sleep efficiency, which is a percentage of how many hours we spent sleeping out of the whole time we spent in bed. So the higher the percentage of that is kind of like shows the better results. So let's say if you spent, let's say 10 hours in bed, and then out of it you slept only 5 hours, that means that your sleep efficiency score is 50%. So what usually like people do in CBTi is that they then shorten their time spent in bed to match more their current time that they basically like sleep. So let's say if a person sleeps like 5 hours, then the sleep window would be something like 5.5 or 6, and then when their percentage, the sleep efficiency increases something like more over 85%, then they can slowly increase the amount of time that they can spend in bed. So this is how it works. So if the percentage is low, usually they decrease it, and if percentage is higher, then they usually add more time. So this is how this sleep efficiency and sleep restriction works. And I think the main driver, the explanation here, is that they try to accumulate as much of sleep drive as possible, so that nothing is kind of like wasted throughout the day on naps or sleeping in. And then once the time comes for a person to go to bed, this is when all their sleep drive is supposed to take over. So they make it like more efficient. Then there is another concept in CBTi, which is stimulus control, which is mostly about correcting our conditioned responses to our bed. Usually it talks about the relationship, our relationship with bed. So stimulus control is aimed at creating an association with bed that involves only sleep and not kind of connect bed with wakefulness. And so CBTi suggests that if you find yourself awake in bed for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, then you're supposed to get up from bed and leave, be in another room. And then once you feel sleepy, then you can come back. And then again, if you cannot find yourself like sleeping again for 20 minutes, then you again leave bed. So it's kind of like back and forth thing. So that's usually that's the gist of the stimulus control. Then there is sleep hygiene, which is basically creating all possible conditions around yourself that will make sleep more, it's supposed to make sleep more like easier. Let's say not drinking coffee, not drinking coffee like after lunch, or doing more like exercises, different relaxation techniques, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of kind of like other like side things that people implement to help in sleeping. So this is basically like CBTi is more a complex topic, so it includes many kind of aspects, but the major ones usually are sleep restriction, stimulus control, and sleep hygiene. Now, when it comes to the advantages, that's what I want to put out first, because I did try CBTi. I mean, I was playing around with it, so it was something that I read books, I tried to understand the concepts, I implemented something, but I was never super disciplined with that. So it was more like an on and off relationship with that. So I was, maybe for 1 week I could stick to it, and then I was just like, say, screw that, I just want to kind of losing it up. And so that's how my experience with it went. But the kind of good points, what I noticed, and I'm actually glad that I tried CBTi in the beginning of my insomnia recovery, because prior to that, I spent so much time in complete fear and desire to not experience wakefulness. So the idea for me to actually turn face to face with wakefulness and consciously to not try to sleep anymore, for me that was a revolutionary idea. And that kind of had an effect on me, which was like, okay, I can do that. I can actually not try too hard to sleep. So it felt like the whole idea that I don't have to chase sleep, that was revolutionary for me. And I'm glad that it kind of gave me support in this, like in facing my fears. So it just gave me this opportunity just to understand that whatever I'm afraid of does not have to be as scary as I thought it would be. So that was like one of kind of positive points of CBTi, the insight that I got from it. Now, another kind of advantage that I saw for myself was when I was reading a book on CBTi, and this book is not in English, so I will not even talk about it. But I remember that the first part of the book was about like theory, and it started with the cognitive part, where basically the author was explaining how sleep works, how anxiety works, how we can challenge our thoughts, that we don't have to always believe our thoughts. And that education, this cognitive intervention, was so helpful for me. I felt really understood when I was reading that book. It really resonated with me. It helped me see that I can challenge my thoughts and I can challenge my beliefs. And that was really encouraging and really fresh for me to hear. So I really benefited from that part. Also in that book, the author was talking about things like usually people don't really realize when they struggle with sleep. For example, that awakenings are completely normal, and that during insomnia, oftentimes people miscalculate or misinterpret how many hours they sleep. So it is very likely that we sleep more than we think we are. For me, that was so helpful to know, because when I struggled with all-nighters all the time, I felt like at some point I'm gonna die, because it's impossible for me to be awake that long. But then reading that actually I can't be misinterpreting my the amount of hours how I sleep, because of that hyperarousal and constant monitoring, that my brain doesn't really register the moments when I do sleep. So that was really refreshing for me to hear and very helpful. So I love the cognitive part of CBTi. That was super helpful. And then I think the third advantage of CBTi, and particularly of the sleep restriction, is that sleep restriction, generally it is kind of believed to be accumulating the sleep drive, so that we can fall asleep easier and sleep like longer solidly. I don't really feel that is super helpful, because I don't feel that we have a problem of lack of sleep drive when we have insomnia. I think that we have enough of sleep drive. We just have too high hyperarousal. But the kind of like the good side of sleep restriction is that we physically reduce the amount of, or we reduce an opportunity to try hard to sleep. So let's say if I spend in bed like 6 hours, then I know that I'm less likely to try to force myself to sleep when I'm in bed. So it was kind of like created conditions where I did less sleep efforts. So this is where it was, I see this kind of like helpful in this way. Now, let's go to the parts where I think CBTi is not super helpful, at least how I found it not really helpful. And for me, that is the behavioral part, to be honest. The whole idea of the sleep restriction and stimulus control, to me, it sounds very inhumane, and it lacks empathy. Because it treats the human body as some sort of machine where we can just starve ourselves, like as if you have a car and then you want to fix it by letting it run out of gas, and then it will just stop. And to me, even though like the principle of sleep drive and everything, it is true, because like at some point we all fall asleep, right? So we cannot stay awake forever, but at what cost that happens? And many people, and myself included, find themselves already struggling to sleep, but then having to even pressure themselves to even spending even less time for, allowing themselves to rest and having no pressure, but having like rigid rules, rigid structures, tons of like do's and don'ts, that can add additional pressure, making the whole process of recovery seem like torture. And to me, that feels unnecessary, because the way how, let's say, I recovered, it was not through CBTi. Although CBTi had place in my journey in the beginning, the rest of the journey was not based on CBTi at all, and it did not prevent me from, getting out of this vicious cycle. So I feel like the major problem with CBTi is this rigidness and lack of empathy. Now, there's also like the problem that I see with CBTi is that it focuses so much on performance with this sleep efficiency scores and setting like a time frame for when you can go to sleep, and then if you cannot fall asleep, then you need to count, like you need to know when is 20 minutes for you to get up. So this seems like it just brings our mind back into the state where it feels anxious to perform sleep. And when we see that, let's say, our efficiency score is good, of course, we feel great, right? But when the score is not that great, we usually feel so much tension, so much anxiety. We might feel like we are failures, like something is going wrong. So I feel like the performance and time component in all this approach is very counterproductive. The sleep diaries, I also don't find them super helpful. I did try to keep it, but then I realized that it just makes me more fixated on my terrible sleep. So I did not find it helpful. So I feel like this is something that kind of perpetuates the cycle of, trying to fix sleep and then like getting even more frustrated because of it. And then it also can be turned into major sleep effort. Because yes, it might reduce the possibility to try other efforts. But in and of itself, the CBTi can be seen as one huge, giant sleep effort where we think that through behavioral interventions we can control our sleep. Well, in reality, we don't really directly control our sleep. We just starve ourselves and collect this sleep drive when eventually it does result in sleep. But then it also, I find that for some people, it can kind of traumatize them. The whole idea that restricting time in bed, it can feel so pressuring. And even if they feel like, okay, it kind of helped me, but it was like a pure torture. And then they feel they're so dreading the idea that they have to do it again. And this is what I haven't actually truly figured out, whether CBTi suggests this or not. But it feels like it doesn't really provide much room for kind of like setbacks. And my feeling from there that it usually, like, if let's say I went through this program and then I'm sleeping well and then I hit a speed bump, then I have to do it all over again. So I was speaking with a couple of people who did go through CBTi and then they had a setback. But then they were so afraid of going back to doing all the sleep restriction and things like that. They were seriously terrified of that. And I felt like that there was like a new trauma created because of that rigidness. So definitely I feel like, we need to be a little bit more conscious of that possibility that too much rigidness might not be our friend here. So yeah, I would say these are all cons or disadvantages. Okay, sleep hygiene, obviously. To me, that's just like a series of sleep efforts. Tons of them. And in reality, getting rid of coffee will not fix insomnia in my experience as well. Because I loved drinking coffee before insomnia. When my insomnia started, the first thing I did, I just removed coffee completely and my sleep did not change at all. And then I decided to just, okay, screw that. I'm gonna enjoy my coffee in this miserable time for me. And I started drinking coffee and sleep was still happening. I mean, it was still a bumpy ride, but it didn't seem like coffee was the reason for that. So I feel like sleep hygiene, particularly for insomnia and sleep anxiety, might not be super helpful. In itself, like we can adjust our lifestyles to, if we want to, wake up at the same time, if we want to avoid caffeine, that's completely normal. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would say making it as a solution to fix sleep, that can be a little bit tricky, because that it can fuel our anxiety around sleep. I actually just recorded the video, and then I realized that I forgot to mention another disadvantage of CBTi, and particularly of stimulus control, and it is the fact that it can teach us to fear wakefulness even more. Because when we have to get up and force ourselves to go to another room after 20 minutes of not being able to fall asleep, what we basically do, we punish ourselves for not being able to sleep. We punish ourselves for wakefulness. And this is something that can impact our relationship with wakefulness itself. And if you've been following my channel, you know that, in my opinion, changing the relationship with wakefulness is something that is so helpful in the process of quitting the vicious insomnia cycle. So that's what I wanted to add. Yeah, so these are my major disadvantages that I see in CBTi. Now, thinking about like how we can actually make CBTi work if we really, really want to if we really feel kind of attracted to it, but we are afraid of it. And I was talking to people for whom it worked and who were like really standing by it. And there are actually coaches who work it with this kind of like CBTi modality. And I feel that, yeah, like for some people it can be really helpful to have a structure, to have some sort of like a routine. And my thinking here is that the reason why for some people CBTi works is that it takes off the load of them to problem solve this. So they know that I have a structure and I'm just gonna stick with it. So for them, all those principles, they become kind of like a no-brainer. They don't overthink this. They actually they like to rely on that structure. And usually those are the people who thrive in general in life by having structure. So they always had their regular wake-up time. They always liked the rules and some like habits, very disciplined people. So I feel like for these types of personalities, like CBTi can be a fitting choice. But for people who are more on, who need flexibility, who are not performing really well under this kind of like rigidness rules, I feel like a bit more flexibility and more gentleness would be more beneficial for them. So if there's any way how we can turn CBTi into a no-brainer, I think that can, help us to kind of benefit from it. But if we try to really overthink and really rely on every step that we take and hope that it will make us sleep, I think a lot of sleep efforts can come out of it. So this is one thing. And then another kind of point that could maybe make CBTi more effective would be actually focusing on the cognitive part, because I really love the cognitive part. I really love when I was giving an explanation for my experiences. I was giving education, and I really like the CBTi part, like the cognitive part for that. The education, the understanding, and I feel like there should be more, that it should be kind of like a focus of that. And then the behavioral part is something that is like more secondary to it, or maybe even optional. But I feel like it starts with understanding, and it might be more helpful, because then we understand the tools that are used in the behavioral part better, instead of just blindly like trying to restrict everything, but knowing that why we do it, and maybe knowing that we can adjust it. That could be a little bit helpful for us. Another point that is kind of worth maybe rethinking about CBTi is that letting go of measurements, letting go of any quantifiable data from it, meaning that not calculating the sleep efficiency scores. And I know that usually to make something scientific, it has to be measured. It has to be like proved that yes, it's like we are improving. But I don't feel like for the person who is actually going through the process, it is really helpful. It is like when we know that we are being observed and judged, our behavior changes, our internal state changes. So sometimes the observation can change the outcome. Even if like the principles might be helpful, but just the idea that I'm going to be kind of like estimated and tracked based on that, or based on my performance, which by the way I cannot control, meaning that yes, we can track how efficiently we spend our time in bed, but we don't really control that number. So it is more of we're basing our success based on something that we cannot control, and that can be at times very discouraging. And yeah, basically for me it's making CBTi more flexible sounds like something that could possibly make CBTi in general friendlier solution, or I don't know. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of like say with this video and to wrap this up is basically the way how I think about CBTi is pretty neutral. It is a tool. It is just one of the tools that are at our disposal, and we can choose to use it. We can choose not to use it, because in and of itself, CBTi is not something that creates sleep. It is just a framework. And I would say the real power to transform, to recover lies within us. It is not somewhere like an outside tool. So when we understand that, we become more like a master of a tool. We know when to use this tool or that tool. We know the limitations of each tool, so we can adjust it to ourselves. But I don't feel like that, CBTi is the only answer to insomnia. And this is not even my experience, because I had CBTi, like I tried, I was playing around with it, but it was not something that was mandatory for my recovery.